Good evening and welcome to Thursdays with NAMI. My name is Peg Morrison. I am the Assistant Director with NAMI North Carolina. I'm so glad y'all are here. Thursdays with NAMI is our way of building conversations and building community around the topic of mental health. June is Pride Month, one of my favorite months. It's a time to honor the struggles and triumphs of the LGBTQ community, and that stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer communities. What makes that a mental health issue? What's the connection there? Because LGBTQ folks face stigma and discrimination, and that's so harmful to mental health. For example, take suicide in the United States. According to the UCLA School of Law, just over 2% of the overall US population has attempted suicide during their lifetime. Among the LGBTQ community, that number jumps to 17%. That's a big increase, dramatic numbers. So we're here to share some love and support and do some public education. Tonight's guest is really a perfect candidate for our goal tonight. Mark Simon, he will be sharing his story as a gay Latino man who lives with mental health challenges. We'll be getting the full scoop in just a moment. As usual, the first part of our show will be an interview with our guest. Partway through, we'll show a video of the week, and then we'll spend time answering questions from you, members of our virtual studio audience. Now, first, a word from our sponsors. Thursdays with NAMI is funded in part by the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Mental Health, Developmental Disabilities, and Substance Use Services through the Federal Community Mental Health Block Grant Fund. They have been fabulous partners and supporters to NAMI North Carolina, and we are truly grateful. All right, Mark Simon. Tonight's guest got involved with NAMI as I did in the great state of Ohio, also where our Executive Director, Gary Kreitz, comes from. He spoke to many audiences about his 11-year journey as an individual living with bipolar and obsessive compulsive disorders. Today he's pursuing a Master of Public Health at UNC Chapel Hill, and he was recently honored with the Lucy S. Morgan Fellowship. Congratulations and welcome, Mark.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. I'm excited to be here today.
Yeah. And we always like to know the background of our guests. Of course, I spelled some of it out, but tell us about yourself in a nutshell.
Sure. At my core, I like to tell people that I'm a mental health advocate, educator, and storyteller. So after a decade of significant struggles as a teenager and young adult, I now live successfully with bipolar disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder. And in this recovery stage, I like to use my lived experiences to advocate for things like equity and inclusion and educate the public on mental health and share my story in ways to raise awareness on mental health and help fight stigma. A little bit about me: I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, along with 4 other siblings. We faced many challenges, which I'll touch on momentarily, but I persevered thanks in large part to a protective effect of my involvement with the Boy Scouts. I'm an Eagle Scout, and an amazing internship that I had with a financial planning firm. I ultimately moved to Cincinnati to attend the University of Cincinnati. There I got my bachelor's in accounting from UC and worked in corporate finance for 8 or 9 years. In 2020, I transitioned to a career in mental health, again, which I'll touch on later. Fast forward to a year ago, I moved to Carrboro, North Carolina to begin the full-time Master of Public Health and Health Behavior at UNC Chapel Hill. And I'm also pursuing a certificate in total worker health. Kind of diving into my personal life, I really enjoy all kinds of outdoor recreation, including hiking, camping, fishing, cycling, kayaking, all those things. Since moving here in North Carolina, I've become an avid birder. I go bird watching just about every day and have observed, I think, 108 species now since I started tracking it in January. I'm an avid coin collector, and I'm a morning person. So I wake up every morning at 5 a.m., and that's kind of my peaceful moment where I sit in bed listening to NPR and listening or sipping on my coffee. And lastly, and whenever I have these kind of engagements, I always like to let you know that I have a naturally serious demeanor. So I kind of acknowledge that in the beginning and assure you that I'm excited to be here tonight. And I promise I'll try and smile a couple of times.
I love that. I saw a video of you on Instagram, and you made that comment, and it gives me a smile that just the way you say that so casually. And having come from Ohio, I am just enthralled with the outdoor opportunities and the bird watching opportunities down here. It's a nice change, huh?
Yeah, it really is. I'm loving it here.
Absolutely. Comment from Gary, mornings are evil, LOL. I'm kind of with Gary on that one.
I know I'm unique, not a lot of people do that. So
Yeah. Gail, our psychiatric nurse, Gary and Gail are our chat box volunteers. They are both one of each on each of our teams. Gail morning, Gary evenings. But I digressed. Let's get back to our questions. Your mental health journey began in high school when you were diagnosed with bipolar disorder. What signs and symptoms did you experience? What happened then?
sure. So I got, take a step back to that time in my life. I grew up in a very dysfunctional and chaotic home. Because of that, I struggled with periods of depression as a kid. As my living situation improved, however, I usually got better and returned to being a normal, happy kid. I was a bright student and I excelled in the classroom. And at one point, I was even admitted to the gifted program at school. My mental illness started around the age of 13. For no apparent reason, I started getting really depressed, not just having a bad day, kind of sad depression. I stopped eating, I stopped going to school, and didn't leave my bed for almost a month. I got to the point where I started engaging in self-harm and having thoughts of suicide, at which point my mom checked me into a psychiatric hospital. It was at this first hospitalization that I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And a lot of you may already know this, but if there's any people that are not familiar, bipolar disorder is a mental illness characterized by extreme highs and lows in mood, activity level, and energy, known as mania and depression. With the diagnosis and prescription for various medications, I was released and pretty much expected to get better. Medications were the first element of what I now consider to be my mental health toolkit, but this single change was not alone was not enough. So my life at home continued to fall apart till I was eventually arrested after a bad fight with a family member. After that, I moved in with my grandmother and did my best to return to a normal life. My symptoms got better at times. I was certainly in a much more stable household. I'd still fall into deep depressions, followed by manic episodes where I didn't sleep for days, but was still full of energy, spent all my money, and engaged in risky behavior. Because the prescriptions my doctor gave me weren't working, I started self-medicating my junior year of high school by drinking excessive amounts of alcohol and using drugs. I was a smart kid, but my long absences from school and inability to complete many of my assignments caused my academic performance, particularly my GPA, to tank. My school didn't offer much in the way of accommodations. My only saving grace was that I was a good test taker, so I was ultimately able to graduate on time and got admitted to the University of Cincinnati at that time to study biomedical engineering. Moving away to college gave me the opportunity for a fresh start. Like many people, I thought the change in environment would be the solution to my problems, but once that initial adrenaline from the big move wore off, I quickly fell into that same vicious cycle of depression and mania. These symptoms were once again compounded by binge drinking and drug use. And unfortunately, I didn't really disclose any of this to my psychiatrist, so they simply thought the medications weren't working and put me on new ones every few months. So I was not in a good place in life, obviously, and that state that I was in made it really difficult to do homework and attend class and meet with my professors and peers. And ultimately, these unmanaged, sometimes risky behavior and isolation got the best of me at the end of my sophomore year, at which point my performance was so poor that I was asked by my school officials to leave my program of study. And at that point, seeing no other options, I checked myself into the hospital for a second time. And for me, that was kind of like my rock bottom.
Mm. I can relate to that, hoping for a geographic cure. There have been several times when I've moved, including when I moved out away from my parents' home for the first time, where I thought, well, now my mind will be perfectly clear, everything will be absolutely fine. But there's a lot of work to do when you get into a new environment, and
Definitely.
yeah, you have your mental health challenges. They actually moved with me, it turned out. So
They follow you.
yeah. What helped you find a path to recovery? Was it that rock bottom?
Yeah. I mean, well, it took me being in that really dark moment for me to kind of start to emerge out of this kind of darkness and figure out, what I need to do to get better. And so I started with acceptance. I learned to accept that I had bipolar disorder, which, like any other medical condition, it's something that's not within my control. It's actually caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. And I learned to accept that it's okay to ask for help. And these self-discoveries, didn't happen overnight, but they allowed me to more easily access these reservoirs that I'd spent my life building up of resiliency. So when I left the hospital for that second time, I was ready to expand my treatment team. So I found a therapist and a psychiatrist, and they worked with me to find the right combination of therapy and medications. I found the strength.
We might little internet problem.
Can you hear me?
Mark is fine. Okay, so everyone could hear you but me, apparently.
Okay.
I apologize for that.
No, it's totally fine. That's how Zoom works. So I think I was just talking about, I come out of this rock bottom. I was starting to build my care team, and I started exercising healthier behaviors. I think the biggest thing for me, though, was when I found NAMI. So I enrolled in the NAMI peer-to-peer program, which for those of you who are not familiar, it's an 8-week class taught by people with lived experiences on how to live successfully with a mental illness. And that NAMI class was really pivotal for me. It gave me elements what I continue to refer to as my toolkit. It eliminated my isolation with my disability. It gave me access to resources and connected me to people with shared experiences. At the same time, people in the NAMI group introduced me to a bipolar support group. And through that group, I learned safe coping mechanisms. And these people that I was in a group with influenced me to change my way of life. And it also gave me an opportunity to use my, youthful energy to help other people in the group who were confronting their illness at a much later time in life, because I was definitely the youngest person in the group at the time. So after I got stabilized with the help of NAMI, I returned to college and got established with the Disability Services Office at UC, which provided academic accommodations that helped me excel at school. Things started to fall into place then. My accommodations coordinator helped me get on disability, which opened up the access to Medicaid so I could finally receive proper mental health care. I was also connected with an organization called the Ohio Bureau of Vocational Rehabilitation, or BVR. They provide tuition assistance and job coaching. I was able to change my major and got into the College of Business to study accounting. And I ultimately was able to achieve perfect grades for the rest of my years at UC. So things really turned around. I applied to and was accepted to a good internship, and I led several student organizations. I was very active in my fraternity, and I graduated, did well. I graduated in 2012 and right away offered a job at a Big Four public accounting firm. And so over the years, I held a lot of different accounting and senior finance jobs at some of the largest and most respected companies in the world, most recently at a global apparel company. So naturally, before I left, I took advantage of the employee discount and underwent a wardrobe refresh, which I'm still leveraging to this day. So got that. So
you are wearing a very nice pink blazer. I love it.
Yeah, pink for pride. So I think that was kind of a beginning of the recovery process for me. I think my journey to success also started with finding the right medications and learning with the help of a professional and my peers to recognize symptoms and address them head on before they become unmanageable. I've also had to adjust my lifestyle by learning to eat a healthy diet, limiting my use of alcohol or sometimes eliminating it altogether, staying physically active, getting enough sleep, and honestly just making sure to have fun on occasion. During this recovery process for me, I was also diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder. And so someone with the OCD experiences uncontrollable recurring thoughts and or behaviors. For me, it's more so the thoughts. Since the medications used to treat OCD often exacerbate bipolar symptoms, as was the case for me, I've had to learn to manage that disorder just by changing the way I think with cognitive behavioral therapy, but it's been very helpful. I still face challenges. As anyone with a mental health challenge knows, it doesn't go away. It just becomes manageable. So there are times when I encounter a lot of stress in life, and when that happens, it can trigger depression or mania. But when this happens, I work closely with my therapist to improve my thought patterns and my psychiatrist to adjust my medications if needed. Now, I've been on many different medications over the years, but I found that a combination of two mood stabilizers works best for me. But it's always important to note that what works for me may not work for you or your loved one. So it's best to work with a professional to find the right treatment options. And lastly, I'll just add that the biggest impact that my mental illness has had has been on my relationships with other people. So by now, my immediate family and close friends are all well versed in the signs of bipolar and OCD, and they're often able to pick up on symptoms and actions and behaviors of mine before I do, and kind of call me out and help me, get the help that I need. Sometimes, I'm not aware of these things, so it's helpful to have them in my corner.
Hmm. I like your emphasis on acceptance. I've noticed in my own story, many of our viewers know I live with depression, anxiety. I've got some trauma in there. And for me, acceptance was a very difficult thing because I didn't have problems until I was in my 20s or 30s, well, increasing over my 20s and 30s. And so that just the idea of making that mental shift of how I was going to see myself and what dreams and hopes and ideas I had about myself, letting those transform, that was very difficult. Yeah. And I also liked your comment about after your first hospitalization, you had medication and they sent you home and that was it. You're supposed to be better, as though it's not a big journey that requires a lot of work. And clearly, now that you've taken many steps on that journey and done a lot of work, you're in a good space. But it's a lot to get there. It's not just one thing.
Yeah, and I'd like to think that it's improved in the time that's passed since I had that experience, but I think unfortunately there's still probably, there is a shortage of professionals. So in many cases, I think people might be kind of shuffled out as soon as they have like the bare minimum. So organizations like NAMI exist to kind of help people develop further skills to kind of reach that recovery.
Exactly. Yeah, there are so many things that we need from clinicians and professionals, but then there's the rest of your life. I like to say that NAMI is the street smarts of mental health because we're there to help you pull the pieces together and weave the new tapestry in the rest of your life.
Right, and that's exactly what NAMI's done for me.
I love hearing that. So, you identify as gay, Latino, and living with bipolar and obsessive compulsive disorders. How do those different aspects of Mark intersect? Do you encounter more layers of stigma and discrimination with those?
Sure, and that's a great question. As you mentioned, I'm gay Latino with a mental health challenge, and these intersecting identities have played a really unique role in my coming of age, but also in the development of my perspectives on life. For anyone who identifies with these or any other underrepresented community, you may be familiar with the concept of coming out. And so in my case, I feel like I've had to come out 3 times. So I first came out as gay in 2010. It was a very difficult experience in the early years. After I would finally build up the courage to tell someone, I'd often cry uncontrollably as I started talking. Despite that, I'm fortunate to have faced very little discrimination and was always greeted with acceptance. I'm now out to everyone in my life, and when I meet someone new, telling them I'm gay is as easy as mentioning where I'm from, Ohio. The next phase of this identity development journey for me was coming out as Latino. And it sounds kind of funny, but for me, that's kind of how it played out. So my father is from Bolivia, but I didn't meet him until later in life. So I lacked a traditional Hispanic upbringing and cultural connection. For that reason, I recognize that my lived experiences are different than those who are from a Latin American country or who were raised in a Hispanic household. That being said, my Latino identity, albeit a unique one, is very important to me. I knew about my Bolivian heritage since the 4th grade, but for a variety of reasons, I didn't fully embrace it until my adult years. Through a variety of life events that I'll touch on later, I finally accepted this part of my identity in 2016. And then finally, after coming out as gay and Latino, the last step in the journey for me was coming out as someone living with a mental health condition. As I mentioned earlier, my immediate family and close friends knew about the bipolar and OCD, but I kept it a secret from everyone else in my life. This caused a lot of unnecessary stress, and so I started talking about it openly in 2017, first in an NPR interview and later with some workplace initiatives and then through NAMI. once I was fully out as gay, Latino, and someone living with bipolar disorder, I was able to bring my full self to work each day, and I experienced a huge sense of relief that's carried forward through to this day. I think in terms of stigma and discrimination, I'm fortunate to not have faced a lot of it from an external perspective. However, I feel like I deal with a lot of internalized stigma. So because of certain lived experiences and likely influence from the media, I have kind of internalized these expectations of what it means to be gay and Latino and have a disability. And in many ways, I don't know that I fit the mold that's created for these identities. And that can cause me a lot of anxiety. I recently did, through my MPH studies, a qualitative study on body image among queer graduate students. And through that, a participant that we interviewed described a similar experience as enoughness. And it really resonated with me because I feel like they were able to articulate something that I've been struggling to explain a lot of my life. So in terms of my sexual orientation, I often don't feel that I'm like gay enough. Maybe I'm not skinny enough, my shorts aren't short enough, I don't drink or party enough, or I'm not social enough. And I find myself obsessing over losing weight and spending money on clothes I'll likely never wear, drinking more than I'm comfortable with, and going way outside of my comfort zone socially in order to fit in. In terms of ethnicity, I feel like often I'm not like Latino enough. I don't speak Spanish. I don't necessarily look overtly Bolivian. I don't fully understand the cultural norms and expectations. And I don't have a Latino last name because I was adopted. This manifests itself in kind of a form of an imposter syndrome where I'll often participate in Latinx events, either at school or in the workplace. And one of the first things people do is harmless thing is they ask where I'm from. And I always panic when I tell people I'm from Ohio, and I immediately follow up with a abbreviated story about how I was adopted and didn't meet my family until later in life. But it's something that I struggle with, and kind of it came to a head this past winter when I hosted a Latinx night in my apartment, and I was absolutely fixated on making my apartment fit the part. So I hung up all my Bolivian decorations that have been gifted to me in the most visible spaces, and I rearranged family photos to prominently display, me with my Bolivian family members. But I just felt like I needed to do something to fit in, and I felt wrong doing this, but I was kind of afraid, people would think that I was faking it. Obviously, couldn't be further from the truth, and everyone was incredibly welcoming. But this kind of notion of internalized stigma kind of affected me. And then lastly, in terms of having a disability, there are many times when I don't feel disabled enough. Bipolar disorder, as many of you know, can be incredibly disabling. And for me, it was for almost 10 years. But I'm fortunate now to be so far along in my recovery that I'm very high functioning. Sure, I struggle with mood and sleep disturbances almost daily, but it's very rare that I have symptoms so bad that I can't go to school or work, though it did happen a couple of times this past year. When I speak at mental health events or in a support group, I always find myself worrying about not being seen as truly disabled compared to other people who might not be as far along in their recovery. When it came time to apply for accommodations at UNC, the paperwork I filled out made me worry that I wasn't actually disabled enough to qualify for this form of support. But just like other insecurities, this is certainly not true. But I just struggle with this internalized stigma, but it was really eloquently summarized by the student we interviewed as enoughness.
I love that. Of all the stories you just shared, the one I relate to the most is decorating for the party. And I could hear my own inner critic saying, oh, what is this? Well, why are you making this change for this party? But you're honoring your heritage. It's a beautiful thing to do. But I totally understand the internalized stigma or the criticism that was happening in your head for that. Lots of comments in the chat box about the difficulty of internalized stigma and how insightful your comments have been. So you met your father and his family as an adult, is that right?
Yep.
That
Well, my
sounds
father as a teenager, the rest of my family as an adult.
okay. That sounds kind of fascinating. That sounds like a whole different episode, perhaps.
Yeah, I've got an anecdote on it a little bit later in store if there's time. But yeah, it's definitely a story.
Okay, great. We'll look forward to that. And moving right along, you spent 9 years working in corporate finance and did very well. then you decided to shift and focus on mental health. What led to that change?
Yeah, so professionally, I talked about how mental health impacted my personal and social lives, but professionally, historically, it was a little less visible. Given the stigma attached to mental illness, I would almost always keep it to myself. When my symptoms would flare up, I managed to stay calm and bottle up the emotions long enough to get through the day, and then I'd crash as soon as I got home. If things got too bad, I'd take sick days. This technique worked, and it worked well enough for me to excel in my career, but it really came at the expense of my family, friends, and overall health. This changed, however, in 2017 when I decided to come out of work as someone living with mental illness. My employer at the time was looking for a way to raise awareness on mental health in the workplace. And after some persuasion, I decided to tell my story in a written article and a video interview with the CEO of my division, which was published globally to a potential audience of 300,000 employees. It was an awesome experience, culminating in a memorable fist bump with the top executive of my organization after, of all things, after I promised to smile more. So it was a great experience. And a few years later, I was at a different company and I was able to lead another global mental health storytelling initiative. So these experiences with workplace mental health were great, but at the time I was still being paid to do finance and accounting. So for several years, I fulfilled this newfound itch of mine by volunteering extensively with NAMI. So as I mentioned earlier, with NAMI peer-to-peer, I ended up being a teacher for that class, and I finished my first class exactly 10 years to the day of when I finished it as a participant. So that was a really cool full circle experience. Through NAMI, I'm a public speaker, and I've done a lot of presentations to a wide array of businesses and churches and schools and other organizations. I've been able to speak to the FBI, the State Department, University of Cincinnati, and a lot of other schools. Facilitate crisis intervention training for first responders. When I attended the NAMI National Convention in 2019, I was cast in a video documentary for the American Psychiatric Association. And at that time, I was also elected to the board of a major mental health and addictions organization that actually provided services to me during my time of need. And things just, continued to fall into place for me. With NAMI's help, I got my story published in the Washington Post. I started doing interviews with our local broadcast media and had 2 TV appearances. And then with NAMI, I was able to publish my story in the 2020 spring edition of the nationally circulated Advocate magazine, as well as their Voice magazine. And now I'm do a lot of other public type speaking things. But I say all this because all these experiences cemented my true calling being mental health. And so at the beginning of 2020, I started exploring additional professional mental health opportunities, which led me down 2 parallel paths. So first, in the height of the pandemic, I quit my corporate job and started fresh with a nonprofit job with Mental Health America of Northern Kentucky and Southwest Ohio. And in that role, I helped administer a $1.2 million grant to disseminate mental health first aid training to 6,000 Ohioans. And then I'm also a mental health first aid instructor. So that year I taught 23 classes and over 420 students. And then in the midst of all that, I also developed and launched a mental health speaking and consulting business.
Wow. I don't think I realized quite what a high profile guest you were. You've done a lot. Congratulations on making inroads and raising awareness in a work environment that tends to be more conservative, more old school. The banking industry, I think that's one of the most powerful places to make those changes. And I'm so glad you did that.
Thank you. It was a great experience.
That's wonderful. I love the fist bump with the CEO.
Yeah.
So tell us about Mark Simon Says.
Yeah. So Mark Simon Says, catchy name, come up by my best friend Ed. I always got to give him credit for that. But it's the name of my mental health speaking consulting enterprise, which I dedicate to helping businesses, schools, and nonprofits build resiliency in the same way that employers and schools did for me. So I help people successfully meet the challenges of mental illness. I do this through speeches and training and targeted interventions. And I partner with the community to foster awareness of mental health conditions, educate the public about mental well-being, and advocate for healthy families that embrace diversity, such as members of the LGBTQ+ spectrum. Additionally, I collaborate with professionals in leadership positions to improve workplace mental health. My vision, I'm in the early stages of this, but my vision is to create a world without stigma. So in the short term, that means a future where a conversation about mental health is just as commonplace as discussing diabetes or heart disease. Long term, I hope to create a future where recovery is within reach for everyone, not just people that have certain luck of the draw, I guess. And I do this and I advocate for this shift through work as a mental health first aid instructor, a QPR instructor. I introduce mental health awareness into schools to our future leaders, and I share tools from my quote toolkit and basically on how people can get through their own mental health things. And so I strongly believe that meaningful change can be achieved through education awareness, as well as the implementation of inclusive mental health policies in the workplace and the government, and by actions taken by everyday individuals. And so if anyone watching this would like to partner with me on any kind of mental well-being initiatives, feel free to reach out. I can drop my email, or someone can share my email, or you can visit my website, which is just marksimonsays.com.
All right. Yeah, I don't have a lot of extra time, but I love your goals, and so does the chat box. We're on Zoom, of course, so when I refer to the chat box, that's what I'm talking about. I should have shared this at some point earlier. We've got some exciting news recently with NAMI, at NAMI North Carolina, that we will be taking all of our recorded Thursdays with NAMI and boiling them down to an audio file that will be put out there as a podcast. So lots more people will be hearing our episodes, and I'm trying to sensitize myself by describing things that are visual and that kind of thing. So Mark, you're the first one where I'm actually aware of how famous Thursdays with NAMI will be. I feel that
Excellent.
You're a very worthy guest.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So one of your areas, and you alluded to this, is mental health policy, especially regarding the workplace. What do we need to know about the role public health policy can play in combating the mental health crisis in the United States?
Yeah, so first thing I always tell people is that mental health is a public health issue. And I'm a public health practitioner in training as a public health student. So not only is the mental health crisis faced by our nation a public health emergency, it can also be solved in some small, at least in some part, by good public health measures and policy. So often when people talk about treating and tackling the mental health crisis, it's viewed as an individual issue, focusing on individual treatments. And while that's important, in order to tackle an issue as universal and widespread as mental illness, I think the only way to make meaningful strides in this fight is to tackle the problem at a population level. One element of that is mental health policy. Now, we could do a whole segment on what good mental health policy looks like, but tonight I'll focus on 3 small initiatives that I've been researching in my role as a master's student at UNC, based on policy initiatives that have proven to be successful in other states. One thing I looked into is some states have created a workplace mental health oversight commission of sorts. And that, so there's a lot of support in the business community for improving worker mental health, but there's a lack of research specific to our state and kind of a fragmented approach to tackling this public health issue. So some sort of commission could conduct new research on the needs of North Carolina workers and their employees, and also provide technical guidance on employers and organizations that want to introduce mental health supports in their schools and in their organizations, and it's been successful in other states. There's also research kind of being done on possibly funding or incentivizing worksite well-being programs. So there's policies that can be enacted to give funding towards organizations who implement sort of workplace well-being programs, especially ones that focus on mental health. Could be given tax credits or grants to offset the costs, especially to smaller employers who implement these programs. And then lastly, there's a lot of broad changes that can take place, including focusing more on offering paid sick leave policies so employees can take time off to attend to their mental health needs if they're experiencing any sort of psychological distress. All of these issues obviously require change at a high level and a coalition of supporters. But I hope to use my support or my position as an individual with mental illness, as a speaker and consultant, and a public health student to help bring together people, coalesce over some ideas to really tackle the mental health problem.
All right. Well, that's a great summary, and I sure hope for North Carolina that we get Medicaid expansion soon.
Another
You
great one.
right. You mentioned how you'd like to improve access to care, that it shouldn't be the luck of the draw, and that was the first thing that came to my mind is Medicaid expansion. And fortunately, it is being looked at seriously right now in the state legislature.
Yeah, it's very good news.
Yeah. So you're a storyteller. Would you like to tell us a story now?
Sure. I know I've been talking a while, so I'll keep it short, but a quick story about that pivotal experience I kind of hinted at earlier about accepting, coming to terms with my Latino heritage in 2016. So at that time, I was facing a rough patch in my life. I was incredibly overwhelmed with work and was burdened by a number of personal issues, both of which were starting to take its toll on my health. Fortunately, that spring, my employer rolled out this new unlimited vacation policy. So after consulting with my manager, I ended up taking 2.5 weeks off to drive 1,600 miles of the Pacific Coast Highway by myself. It was a once in a lifetime experience that really gave me the opportunity to reflect on what was and wasn't working in my life. And I came to terms with the fact that a big driver of my unhappiness was the fact that I was separated from half of my family and felt very disconnected from my Hispanic heritage. Even though I had met my Bolivian father in high school, I had very minimal contact with the rest of my extended family. I wanted so badly to identify and explore this Latino side of my life, but I knew very little about my family or culture. But that all changed on this road trip because the last minute I found out that my Bolivian grandparents were visiting my two aunts in California. So I made a last minute detour and ended my trip early, drove into Bakersfield, California, and spent the weekend with them. And so it was a weekend full of love and learning, acceptance. And despite the language barriers and these decades of separation, in the span of just a few short days, my grandparents made me feel right at home. And then a few months later, I met the rest of my Bolivian family at a big Rojas family reunion in Washington, D.C., which I, of course, attended. And that weekend in November, I met the rest of my aunts and uncles and cousins and second cousins and great aunts. And contrary to my fears about not fitting in or being viewed as an outsider, I was shown more love and acceptance than at any other point in my life. And now I've only known most of these people for 6 years, but I'm closer to a lot of my Bolivian family than I am the rest of my family that I've known almost my entire life. So it's been a really fast-paced change in my life, but it's been an exciting one. And I'm very happy to have the support of this side of my family.
Oh, that's fabulous. I'm so glad that came together for you. It sounds like it was meant to be.
Yeah, it really was.
Mm, that's beautiful. So, what gives you hope?
Thanks. I love this question. I admit, I have to admit that right now there are a lot of things that give me hope. I think the thing that stands out more than anything is just recognizing how incredibly fortunate I am to have not only found my life's calling, but now I can follow my passion and make a career out of it. A lot of people, cannot say that they do what they do what they love and also get paid for it. So I've obviously shared a lot about my struggles as a teenager, young adult, and there were a lot of times when I wanted to give up. And I really, tonight I just scratched on the surface of some of, the childhood experiences that I had. But, I think, look at me now. Like I just finished arguably the most exciting couple of years in my life. In the span of just 2 years, I was able to completely reinvent myself. I left a career that made me very unhappy. I made a big impact on a nonprofit, started a business, and now I'm a master's student at the #1 public school of public health in the country. And so, despite a very rocky undergraduate experience where there were many, it took me 6 years to graduate, and I'm not really sure how I did, I'm now thriving as a graduate student. I was able to achieve perfect grades both semesters in my first year. I got elected as cohort representative. I was awarded a fully funded research assistantship with the New Carolina Center for Total Worker Health and Wellbeing. I was elected as Director of Health and Wellness for Graduate and Professional Student Government. I was awarded a teaching assistantship for this upcoming fall semester. And as you mentioned earlier, I was just awarded the big fellowship through my department. So I'm doing all this, and I think about like every day, like, how am I doing this? But I just kind of keep pushing forward. So I'm now involved with the American Public Health Association mental health section, and I'm an active member on the Workplace Mental Health Committee, the think tank Hero Health. And this summer, I'm excited to have landed a dream internship with the American Psychiatric Association Center for Workplace Mental Health. In this role, I get to do research on the needs of young adult workers, exactly what I was. I'm kind of aging out of that, but I still identify in many ways with that age group. And I just have to pinch myself whenever I start thinking about my life, because for so much of it, this seemed to be unattainable. So circling back to the notion of hope, I just want to say that, convey that hope is never in vain. Even at the darkest moments of my life, I had some, flicker of hope that things would get better, and they did. And this hope, for me, it just tells me that hope leads to action, and that action leads to change.
That's a great answer, and I'm so glad that you put forth the effort and things fell together and things came together in a way that you were able to move forward and rise to your full potential the way you have. And I just want to emphasize, because your style is pretty understated, but you've achieved all that even with substance use challenges in your background, even with an arrest in your background, even with hospitalization in your background. And I hope you don't mind me saying that way, but for folks who are listening who have been through those things, which a lot of us have, I just think it's so powerful that you can do these things. Just keep walking towards the goal.
Thank you. Yeah, it's helpful to hear that from other people. So thank you.
Well, it's inspiring to me as well. So, all right. So we are going to turn to our video of the week in just a moment. It's time to wrap up the interview portion of the show. Before doing so, I want to give a big shout out to our heroes working behind the scenes, psychiatric nurse Gail Pruitt on Facebook and executive director Gary Kreitz, who's always there for us on the chat box. So thank you so much for your support and all your encouraging comments. Our video of the week, I usually go with something light. And so we've had some mascots here with NAMI North Carolina. We have dogs in the office, and this is our last mascot, Roxy Morrison. She's no longer with us, but we love to honor her in this way. All right.
It's a great video. I love dogs.
Thank you. She was a sweetheart. She was our baby. We lost her to cancer, but she lives on in our hearts. All right. So now we're going to take questions from you, members of our virtual studio audience. And I see we've got two lined up. If you're on Facebook Live, please type your question anywhere in the comments and it will be delivered to us. Okay, first one. Hi, Mark. You talked about joining the NAMI peer-to-peer program. How did you hear about that? How do you suggest recommending this to a young adult?
For me, I was recommended it. It was given to me as part of my release papers from my hospitalization. I believe now, so I entered peer-to-peer as someone very early stages in the recovery. I think now it's recommended for someone who's a little bit further along in their recovery. I'm not sure, but I think for me, it was given to me by like the people at the hospital, but recommending it to young adults, I think there's an online presence, like linking to information about it. I know there's a number of NAMI affiliates in this area. I think just sharing videos like this, because I'm always a big advocate for peer-to-peer, having people talk about it. Because it's one thing to just promote it, but to hear from someone who's actually been through it and who it's helped, I think is a good thing. If it's a young person, possibly talking about it in school, if they're in a college or institution, there's NAMI presence on campus sometimes, just kind of making everyone aware that it exists and knowing where to refer people when they find out more, or to find out more.
Yeah, I would support all of those, and I like that. No, your answer was always about attraction, not promotion, that you want to get the person but not pressure them.
Yeah, you have to be at a stage where you're willing to kind of figure out kind of some of these life changes, coping
Mhm.
skills.
Yeah, it can be a tricky conversation. Good question. Gary has a question. You've been a business person and entrepreneur. Now you're in academia. What can universities do to support the mental health of their students?
Um, this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. I think, and I just gave a talk on it with the American Public Health Association. I think the biggest thing that students lack, at least, and I'm coming to this as a graduate student, but I think it's relevant to undergraduate students too, is just creating, and it's very similar to the workplace, a culture where people encourages help seeking, a culture where people are comfortable not only sharing their mental health struggles, but asking for help. And that requires changes in culture, both the student side, making people aware, of these mental health conditions and the supports that exist out there, but also on the faculty and administration side, educating people on what to look out for and how to, ask for help or ask someone if they need help, and how to offer things like extensions and any sort of accommodations on an unofficial capacity that may help someone that's struggling. And I also just think working to create a sense of community. I think, I came back to school, at the height of the pandemic. And so everything was remote. My first semester, second semester was virtual or hybrid. You could do either in person or remote. Myself and a lot of people chose to do remote, but I think you lose the sense of community. And I'm fortunate that I'm an older student, so I knew how to build a network and build friends groups and build that support. But a lot of people who are have less experience with all that, coming into a virtual environment, I think they lack that sense of community, and they were kind of left without the supports that they needed. And I think students inevitably drop out, or don't have good outcomes because of that. So I think creating a culture shift where people can talk about it openly, but also creating a better sense of community where everyone knows how to help one another out.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like young people are a little more comfortable. They seem to have more literacy on just topics of emotions and wellness. We're not there yet, but I do see improvement from when I was young.
Yeah, and I definitely think that exists for sure, peer to peer. But I think there's still this stigma that exists, like sharing your emotional needs with a professor, someone much older and of someone of great importance. And that's something that kind of came through loud and clear in a open discussion we had with the American Public Health Association about a month ago. I think there's still students are not always comfortable to talk, cross that barrier from student to professor.
Sure, it does feel like a big risk, I'm sure. All right, so anonymous question, do you recognize when you're slipping into mania or depression, or does it sneak up on you?
I have a lot of things in place. Like I know what the warning signs are, but inevitably it does sneak up on me, and I think it happens for me. My illnesses disorder has like changed a little bit over the years. Growing up younger, I was mostly depression, with intermittent mania. Now I deal mostly with mania that, if not managed properly, will then crash into depression. And the mania has a tendency to really slip um, up with me. And I think the thing is, it's for me is like things are going really well in my life. So it's like it's normal to feel excited and almost euphoric just because I've worked really hard and it's all paying off. But it's like a very fine line when that's like normal emotions to when that's mania. And, I sometimes, start by this past year, like I had a period of time where I was sleeping really well, then I started not sleeping at all. I had, take medications to help me get that under order. But like, I just little things like just a heightened, elevated sense of, mood, but then also spending is a big thing for me. So like when I'm manic, I spend more money than I should. And so I will start just like slowly spending more money than I should be. And that's kind of hard to keep track of until, you start reconciling your expenses, or you just like look at all the things you've physically purchased. But so it does sneak up on me, and it happened a couple of times this year. Granted, I was under a lot of stress from like moving and starting a new life, but I faced a lot of really severe mania, and I'm fortunate that I got through it. But it was several weeks to a month of just a really challenging period of time, and it did sneak up on me.
Mm. What is the distinction between an elevated mood because things are going really well and your energy is high versus I'm going to be in trouble if this continues? Is it sleep or sort of
I think sleep and just being able to shut that elevated mood off. I think if it, for me, there probably isn't a right perfect answer because it's different for everyone. For me, it's like if I'm able to like feel the elevated, throughout the day, if I'm excited and I have reason to be excited, but then it should kind of wind down as I wind down for bed. But like when I'm manic, it doesn't ever end. Like I described it to my psychiatrist as like when I was in full swing, I was like the feeling of like, just won the lottery, running a marathon and drinking a gallon of Red Bull, but like for 24 hours, like it just does not shut off. And it's like, it's very uncomfortable, especially when I'm trying to sleep, to just like feel super amped up. And I think that's obviously different than if it's like excitement from just doing really well on the test or something like that, when it kind of fades when it's supposed to.
Gotcha. Yeah, sometimes it's hard to just turn that off and let yourself calm down, your body, mind. Next question. You're an advocate on many levels. If you testified before Congress tomorrow to push for an action, what would it be?
It's a good question. Never been asked that before. Um, I think I know you said Congress. I think I'm a believer that things happen more effectively and faster at a local or state level. So I would probably start kind of twist your question a little bit and kind of testify for North Carolina General Assembly. And I think I didn't mention it in one of my policy ideas, but like you did, Peg, as far as like pushing for Medicaid expansion. I think that's something that is just proven, all across the country to have made a big difference in, opening up access to mental health care for people, any mental health, any condition, but especially with mental health conditions. So I think I would definitely advocate for that. Because I myself, was benefited from Medicaid when I was younger and the expansion of it. And so, I'd like to think that that was a part of the reason why I'm at, where I'm at now. So.
And again, you're a fine example of why Medicaid is a good investment. If, of course, from the human side, we want people to get the care that they need. But if you're really motivated by the financial side, doing preventative care and making sure people don't put off care for too long or go without, it can result in someone doing very, very well for themselves.
And now, I benefit from Medicaid, but now I'm like, I'm a break right now because I'm a student, but for 10 years I was, paying taxes and like paying back into the system that I benefited from. So it does have, I hate to think of Medicaid as something you look at a return on investment, but sometimes like maybe when you just look at dollars and cents, like there is a benefit beyond the human benefit.
Exactly. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. That's kind of what I was thinking, but I did not spell it out or say it clearly. From Gail, oh, go ahead. Okay. You were reaching for water. I thought you were about to talk.
Oh, no.
From Gail, I've been admiring the image on the top shelf to your left. Are you comfortable sharing what it is?
My left over here, that's it's the state of Ohio. I got this at a craft show, and then the heart is where Cincinnati is located. So it's just, big part of my life will always be Cincinnati. I'm Cincinnati, Ohio. I was born in Columbus, but I spent most of my life in Cincinnati. So, and people who know me know that I'm like super, still to this day, super enthusiastic about it. So, and then on my other side, I've got my old well, UNC Chapel Hill. So,
Oh, nice. All right, your special locations right on the top shelves. Okay, I like that. So there used to be a saying Ohio is the heart of it all. It was like a marketing slogan the state came up with. And so now Cincinnati is the heart of it all.
yeah, for me at least.
All right. And next question, how does your support system help you when you're experiencing mania and unaware of your mania? Is there a plan in place? And if so, how did that come about?
I think there I'm still it's my support system's largely still my friends in Ohio who have known me for years and years and years. Like I think I definitely have some great friends in North Carolina, but probably they haven't known me long enough to know what to look out for. But definitely I have a couple of go-to friends who just ask me how I'm doing and ask me, what I've been, if I've made any big purchases lately, and just kind of, I don't know, they're very easy to like, they know how to ask the right questions to figure out if I'm okay or if there's things I should be concerned about. And I think they're very good at like giving me, one friend in particular who's just very good at like giving me step-by-step advice on what I can do to kind of get myself out of this. That's not always a crisis, but like emerging crisis. And I think that's very helpful. And just throughout my whole first year at school, like there are many times where I was struggling with something and I would still, call various friends in Ohio just to ask for advice on how to do different things. I think that's the biggest risk I took moving to a new state, not just any state, a state 9 hours away, was starting a new social support network. And it's definitely going well, but, the kind of things that I have friends that know me for 15 years, that takes time to kind of remake. But
Right. Yeah, you definitely want to be sure you know someone well enough before asking about their purchases.
yeah.
All right. That makes a lot of sense. It does take time, even if you're surrounded by wonderful people. From Gary, you are so eloquent. Are you a writer? If so, what do you write?
I enjoy writing, but it's just I'm not very efficient at it. So right now, I write primarily stories and like personal stories and narratives about, I just have a lot of lived experiences that I like to write about and speak about. In school right now, I do a lot of writing on, academic things, but also just mental health ideas and policy initiatives. I hope to eventually, when time allows, to write, a book. Like everyone says they want to write a book, but I really do want to write a book about my life and the experiences that I've had. And so I think I have it in me. I just got to start doing that. And so I do enjoy writing, and I actually have a wonderful kind of coach who helps me. I have two like coaches. I have someone who kind of helps me just kind of think through my thoughts in a narrative format, and I also have a coach who just helps me more like grammatically and spelling. And together I've just formed a really cool team that's helped me become, I feel like, a good writer. So
Nice. It sounds like you're really good at identifying where you could use assistance and just going for it.
yeah, I'm fortunate that I don't know, I guess because I had to kind of find my own sources of support. I feel like that's one of my strengths, is identifying support and leveraging that. And that's gotten me really far in life because I'm absolutely not afraid to ask for help.
Yeah, well, I could learn from that, and I know a lot of other folks could too. We have a brief lull in the questions, so I'll read some announcements. Please come back and join us next week. We'll be closing out Pride Month with an interview. I'll be talking to my own sister, Lisa Flynn. She's a trans woman who hatched, as she said, in her 60s. So it's been a heck of a year and a half for us, with a lot of dramatic change, and she's excited to tell her story. She's very candid. Please fill out our survey when you leave the Zoom session. SurveyMonkey questions will magically appear on your monitor. Please answer those. It helps us improve over time, show the state what we do, make suggestions. Maybe you'd like to be a guest on Thursdays with NAMI. Put your name and contact number in there. I'd love to hear from you. And there's still a law. Is there anything that we haven't asked, Mark, that you would like to address?
I think we've covered a lot. I'm very grateful to have been given this much, this much time to share as much as I did. I actually do enjoy talking about these things, and I think I like knowing that maybe I've helped at least one other person, but it's, also, not selfish, but like I benefit from this too, because when I hear kind of myself speaking about the things that I've gotten through and accomplished, it's therapeutic for me as well. So this is a really terrific opportunity.
Well, I'm very grateful for your sharing your time and your insight and expertise. I really would love to read your book and or hear more about your story someday. So maybe you'll come back soon. I hope so.
Yeah, I'd love to stay connected.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to again repeat. Join us next week. Meet my sister, the trans woman Lisa Flynn. Hear her story. Fill out our survey. It looks like we're ready to wind down. Again, I've gotten a lot out of your story, and for those of you who are out there who are feeling alone, who are struggling, please reach out to NAMI. If it's not NAMI, reach out to someone you trust. We would love to help you find that path, that safe space. So many folks are lonely and struggling, and we want to help you change that in your life. I've been there, Mark's been there, a lot of us have been there, so reach out.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great night. Bye.